The fluorescent lights in conference room B buzzed overhead like angry wasps as I sat across from Jennifer Walsh, our head of HR, and my now former boss, Michael Chin. The mahogany table between us felt like a canyon, and the silence was deafening except for the distant hum of Chicago's afternoon traffic 30 floors below. "David, we appreciate everything you've done for Meridian Industries over the past 8 years, Jennifer began, her voice carrying that practiced corporate sympathy I'd heard her use during other difficult conversations. She slid a manila envelope across the polished surface. "This is a generous severance package. 6 months salary, full benefits continuation, and all we ask is that you sign this non-disclosure agreement." I stared at the envelope without touching it. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the Willis Tower piercing the gray November sky. 8 years. 8 years of 16-hour days, missed family dinners, sacrificed weekends. 8 years of building their supply chain management division from a 3-person team to a $40 million operation. Generous. I finally spoke, my voice steadier than I felt. "You're firing me 3 weeks before Christmas because I wouldn't falsify those safety reports for the Hartwell project." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze. "We'd been friends once, grabbed beers after work, talked about our kids' soccer games." Now he looked like a stranger wearing a $2,000 suit and the weight of corporate pressure. "David, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be," Jennifer interjected. "The decision has been made. Take your severance and leave quietly. Don't make waves. You have a family to think about." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. I thought about Sarah waiting at home with our twins, Emma and Jake, both 7 years old. I thought about our mortgage, the orthodontist bills, Christmas presents we'd already bought and hidden in the garage. But then I thought about the Hartwell project. The corners we were being pressured to cut. The safety protocols I'd refused to ignore. The workers who'd be at risk if those substandard materials were approved. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the conference table as I looked at both of them. Jennifer's perfectly manicured fingers drummed impatiently on her leather portfolio. Michael finally met my eyes and I saw something there, guilt, maybe even regret. "You know what you're asking me to cover up," I said quietly. "People could get hurt." "That's not your concern anymore," Jennifer replied sharply. "Security will escort you out. Your personal items will be boxed and sent to your home." As if summoned by her words, 2 security guards appeared at the conference room door. I recognized Bob Martinez, who'd worked the front desk for 6 years. He at least had the decency to look apologetic. "I'm sorry, Mr. Chin," he said, and for a moment I wasn't sure if he was addressing me or Michael. "Company policy." I picked up my phone and wallet from the table, leaving the manila envelope untouched. "I don't need your money, Jennifer. And I won't be signing anything." Her face flushed red above her pearl necklace. "David, don't be foolish. This industry is smaller than you think. Word gets around." I walked toward the door, Bob and his partner flanking me like I was some kind of criminal. The familiar hallways of Meridian Industries felt alien now, filled with co-workers who suddenly found their computer screens fascinating as we passed. At my office, former office, I found my assistant Maria boxing up my things. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she pressed a business card into my hand as I walked by. "Mr. Chin, you were the best boss I ever had," she whispered. "Call me if you need anything." The elevator ride down 30 floors felt like falling through time. Each floor we passed represented a memory, a victory, a late night spent solving someone else's problems. The lobby's marble floor clicked under my dress shoes as we crossed toward the revolving glass doors. Chicago's November wind hit me like a physical blow as I stepped onto LaSalle Street. The city that had been my professional home for nearly a decade suddenly felt foreign and cold. Rush hour was beginning, and streams of people in expensive coats hurried past, each lost in their own corporate dramas. I stood there for a moment, watching the windows of Meridian Industries tower above me. Somewhere up there, Jennifer was probably already spinning the story of my departure. Michael was likely in damage control mode, explaining to the team why their leader had decided to pursue other opportunities. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "How did the presentation go?" "The kids want pizza tonight to celebrate." I told her I was giving a major presentation today. I hadn't mentioned it was to HR, defending my refusal to compromise safety standards. Hadn't mentioned that my job had been on the line for weeks. Standing there on the sidewalk, surrounded by the evening rush of downtown Chicago, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to slink away quietly. I wasn't going to let them bury what I knew about the Hartwell project. And I certainly wasn't going to let them win. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in 2 years. Thomas Morrison, my old roommate from Northwestern's Kellogg School. Tommy had left corporate life 5 years ago to start his own private equity firm. More importantly, he'd been trying to convince me to leave Meridian and join him for the past 3 years. Tommy, it's David Chin. Remember that conversation we had about taking risks? I think I'm finally ready to listen. The wind whipped around the glass and steel canyon of downtown as I waited for his response. Above me, the lights in Meridian Industries were beginning to flicker on as employees settled in for another late night. But I wouldn't be among them anymore. David. Tommy's voice was warm with surprise. Perfect timing. I just closed a deal that freed up some serious capital. What did you have in mind? I looked up at the tower one more time, thinking about Jennifer's smug face, Michael's cowardice, and all the workers who deserved better than what Meridian was planning to give them. I want to buy a company, Tommy. And I think I know exactly which one. The coffee at Tommy's office tasted like liquid ambition, dark and bitter with just enough sweetness to keep you coming back for more. His firm, Morrison Capital Partners, occupied the 42nd floor of a sleek building in the Loop, with views that made Meridian's offices look modest by comparison. Let me get this straight, Tommy said, leaning back in his leather chair while Lake Michigan sparkled behind him in the morning sun. You want to acquire controlling interest in Hartwell Manufacturing. The same Hartwell that's been Meridian's primary supplier for the past 15 years. I nodded, studying the financial reports spread across his glass desk. It had been 3 days since my termination, 3 days of sleepless nights researching, planning, and making phone calls to old contacts. Sarah thought I was networking for a new job. She wasn't entirely wrong. Hartwell's been privately held for 3 generations, I explained, pointing to the ownership structure I'd mapped out. Old man Hartwell died 2 years ago, and his daughter Rebecca inherited 60%. His son Marcus got 30%, and 10% went to key employees through an ESOP. Tommy whistled low. And you think they'll sell? I think they have to. Look at these numbers. I slid another document across the desk. Hartwell's been struggling since the old man died. Rebecca's a sociology professor at Northwestern, never wanted to run a manufacturing company. Marcus has been pushing for automation investments they can't afford. They're burning through cash trying to modernize while keeping their workforce intact. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 8 years, I'd worked with Hartwell as Meridian's supply chain director. I knew their operations better than most of their own employees. I knew their strengths, their weaknesses, and most importantly, I knew why they were about to make the biggest mistake in their company's history. Tommy picked up his phone and buzzed his assistant. Cancel my lunch with the Peterson Group. I want our research team to dive deep on Hartwell Manufacturing. Full financial workup, market analysis, the works. There's something else, I said, pulling out my laptop. The reason Meridian fired me. For the next hour, I walked Tommy through the Hartwell project. Meridian's plan to pressure their longtime supplier into using substandard materials for a government contract. The cost savings would be enormous, but the safety implications were serious. When I'd refused to approve the specifications, Jennifer and Michael had given me an ultimatum. Sign off or find a new job. They're going to destroy Hartwell's reputation, I concluded. Force them to choose between compromising their standards or losing their biggest client. Either way, Hartwell loses. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the lake. A cargo ship was making its way toward the harbor, probably carrying raw materials to one of the steel plants in Gary. This is personal for you. Maybe. But it's also business. Hartwell is a solid company being squeezed by a corporate bully. If we can acquire controlling interest, we stabilize their finances and position them to compete without compromising their integrity. And we hurt Meridian in the process. I met his gaze steadily. I'm not looking for revenge, Tommy. I'm looking for justice. The next 2 weeks felt like preparation for war. Tommy's team worked around the clock, analyzing Hartwell's financials, assessing their market position, and developing acquisition scenarios. I spent my days reaching out to contacts throughout the industry, quietly gathering intelligence about Meridian's plans and Hartwell's vulnerabilities. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when Maria, my former assistant, called with information that changed everything. Mr. Chin, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, she whispered into the phone, clearly calling from somewhere private. But Jennifer had me pull all the Hartwell contracts yesterday. She's meeting with their executives tomorrow. Word is Meridian's giving them an ultimatum. I thanked Maria and immediately called Rebecca Hartwell. We'd only met a few times during contract negotiations, but I remembered her as sharp and principled, someone who cared more about her father's legacy than quarterly profits. "Rebecca, this is David Chen from Meridian Industries. I think we need to talk." We met that afternoon at a small cafe in Evanston, near Northwestern's campus. Rebecca looked tired, worry lines etched around her eyes as she stirred her coffee absently. She was younger than me, maybe mid-30s, with her father's steel gray hair and determined jawline. "I'll be honest with you, David," she said after I'd explained Meridian's pressure tactics. "We saw this coming. Meridian's been pushing for cheaper materials for months. Yesterday they made it clear, accept their new specifications or lose the contract." "And if you lose the Meridian contract?" She laughed bitterly. "We probably don't survive. They represent 60% of our business. Marcus thinks we should take their deal, modernize our processes to cut costs even further. But I've seen what those cheaper materials do to structural integrity. I won't put my father's name on something that could collapse." This was my moment. "What if I told you there was a third option?" Rebecca's eyes narrowed with interest as I outlined Tommy's acquisition proposal. We weren't offering to buy Hartwell outright, we were offering to invest in their future. Morrison Capital would acquire 51% of the company, providing immediate capital for modernization and expansion. Rebecca would remain as president, maintaining operational control while we handled the financial and strategic planning. "You're asking me to trust you with my father's life work," she said quietly. "I'm asking you to save it. Meridian's going to pressure you to compromise everything your father built. We're offering you the resources to compete without sacrificing your integrity." She was quiet for a long time, watching students hurry across the campus quad through the cafe window. Finally she spoke. "What's in it for you, David? This can't just be about helping us." I thought about my answer carefully. "Meridian fired me because I wouldn't help them force you to compromise. They thought they could bully me into silence with threats about industry reputation and finding new work. They were wrong. So this is revenge. This is business. Good business. Hartwell is a profitable company being artificially constrained by an abusive client relationship. Free from that constraint, with proper capitalization, you could compete for contracts Meridian would never even bid on." Rebecca pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. "I need to discuss this with Marcus and our board. But David, if we do this, if we trust you with Dad's company, I need your word that you won't turn us into another corporate profit machine. Rebecca, I want to build something better than what I left behind. Help me do that." She extended her hand across the small cafe table. "Give us a week. We'll have an answer by Friday." As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Heard you're sniffing around Hartwell. Some bridges shouldn't be burned. JW." Jennifer Walsh was keeping tabs on me, which meant Meridian was worried. They should be. That evening, I sat in my home office reviewing financial projections while Sarah graded papers at the kitchen table. The twins were finally asleep after an evening of homework battles and bedtime negotiations. Through our window, I could see the lights of our neighbors' houses, each one representing families building their own versions of the American dream. "How's the job search going?" Sarah asked during a break from her grading. I looked at her across our modest living room, this woman who'd supported me through business school, career changes, and 8 years of corporate climbing. She deserved to know what I was really planning. "Sarah, what would you say if I told you I might start my own company instead of looking for another job?" She set down her red pen and gave me her full attention. "I'd say it's about time. You've been miserable at Meridian for the past 2 years. What kind of company?" Over the next hour, I explained everything: the acquisition plan, the partnership with Tommy, the potential risks and rewards. Sarah listened without interrupting, asking thoughtful questions about cash flow, timelines, and what it would mean for our family. "So you're not just changing jobs," she said finally. "You're changing careers. Going from employee to owner. If Hartwell agrees to the deal, yes." She was quiet for a moment, then smiled, the same smile that had convinced me to propose 10 years ago. "David, do you remember what you told me on our first date? You said you wanted to build something that mattered, something that would make a difference." I remembered. We'd been at a small restaurant in Lincoln Park, and I'd been trying to impress her with my corporate ambitions. "This is your chance," she continued. "Not just to hurt the people who hurt you, but to build something better. Something the kids can be proud of." Friday afternoon, Rebecca Hartwell called with their decision. "We're in, David. When do we start?" The Hartwell manufacturing headquarters sat on 12 acres of industrial land in Cicero, a working-class suburb southwest of Chicago where the wind carried the scent of steel mills and the dreams of 3 generations of immigrant families. The main building was solid brick and concrete, Built in 1962 by Rebecca's grandfather with the kind of craftsmanship that expected to last centuries. I stood in the parking lot beside Tommy's Tesla, both of us dressed in our best deal-making armor, tailored suits that cost more than most people's monthly salary, Italian leather shoes that clicked with authority on concrete. But as we approached the main entrance, I found myself thinking about the workers I could see through the factory windows, people in safety gear and work boots who'd built their lives around the steady paycheck this company provided. Nervous? Tommy asked as we signed in with security. Excited, I replied, though my stomach was doing gymnastics routines. Today we would formally acquire controlling interest in Hartwell Manufacturing. Tomorrow I would become part owner of a company that could make or break Meridian Industries' biggest contract. Rebecca met us in the lobby, accompanied by her brother Marcus and their attorney, Patricia Vance. Marcus was younger than Rebecca, maybe early 30s, with the restless energy of someone who'd grown up expecting to inherit a kingdom and found himself managing a struggling democracy instead. David, Tommy, welcome to Hartwell, Rebecca said, shaking our hands with the firm grip of someone who'd learned to project confidence even when the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Ready to make some history? The conference room where we'd finalized the deal was on the second floor, overlooking the main production floor. Through reinforced glass windows, I could watch workers operating machinery that had been state-of-the-art 20 years ago, equipment that still produced some of the highest quality structural components in the Midwest. Patricia Vance spread the contracts across a mahogany table that had probably witnessed every major decision in Hartwell's history. The paperwork was thick enough to stop a bullet, but the core terms were elegant in their simplicity. Morrison Capital Partners would acquire 51% of Hartwell Manufacturing for $32 million. Rebecca would remain as president and CEO. Marcus would oversee modernization and expansion. I would serve as chairman of the board and head of strategic development. Before we sign, Marcus said, looking directly at me, I need to understand your real motivations here. Rebecca thinks you're trying to save the company. I think you're trying to destroy Meridian Industries. Which is it? Tommy started to respond, but I held up a hand. This was a fair question that deserved a direct answer. Marcus, 6 months ago I would have said both motivations are the same thing. Save Hartwell, hurt Meridian, everyone wins except the corporate bullies. I walked to the window overlooking the production floor. But sitting here, seeing your people work, understanding what this company means to your family and this community, I realize it's bigger than my issues with my former employer. Below us, a team was carefully inspecting steel beams, each worker taking their time to ensure quality despite quotas and deadlines. Their precision reminded me why I'd gotten into this business in the first place. Hartwell represents something that's disappearing from American manufacturing, I continued. A company that still believes quality and integrity matter more than quarterly profit margins. Meridian wants to turn you into another commodity supplier, interchangeable with any factory willing to cut corners for cost savings. We want to help you become something better. Marcus studied me for a moment, then nodded to Patricia. Let's sign the papers. The actual signing took less than an hour, but it felt like a lifetime compressed into fountain pen strokes and notary stamps. With each signature, I was committing not just money but credibility, reputation, and future to a vision of what American business could be if we chose principles over profit. When Patricia notarized the final document, Rebecca stood and extended her hand. Welcome to Hartwell Manufacturing, partner. That evening, we celebrated at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse, the kind of old-school Chicago establishment where deals are sealed with handshakes and aged whiskey. Rebecca, Marcus, Tommy, and I occupied a corner booth while rain drummed against the windows and the city sparkled beyond. So what's our first move? Marcus asked, cutting into a steak that probably cost more than his factory workers made in a day. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Tommy pulled out his tablet and opened a presentation he'd been working on for weeks. Phase 1. Immediate financial stabilization. We pay down debt, establish lines of credit, and give you breathing room to make decisions based on long-term strategy rather than monthly cash flow. Phase 2, I added, we diversify your client base. Meridian represents too much of your revenue. Over the next 18 months, we develop relationships with contractors, government agencies, and international clients who value quality over cost. Rebecca leaned forward, interested. And Meridian? Do we keep them as a client? We fulfill existing contracts with our usual quality standards, I said carefully. Any new contracts will be negotiated on terms that reflect our real costs and quality commitments. Marcus laughed. In other words, we tell them to pay fair prices or find someone else. Something like that. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Congratulations on your acquisition. We should talk. MC. Michael Chin. My former boss was reaching out less than 6 hours after the deal became public. Word traveled fast in Chicago's business community. Everything okay? Rebecca asked, noticing my expression. Meridian knows about the acquisition. They'll probably want to meet soon. Tommy raised his whiskey glass. Let them come. We're not the same company they've been pushing around. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Maria called while I was reviewing production schedules in my new office at Hartwell. Mr. Chin, you need to know what's happening over here, she whispered urgently. Jennifer called an emergency meeting with all department heads. They're talking about finding new suppliers, breaking contracts, whatever it takes to shut down Hartwell. Maria, you don't have to keep feeding me information. You could get fired. Sir, with respect, they fired you for doing the right thing. Some of us remember what that looked like. After I hung up, I sat in my office thinking about the workers I could see through my window, people who'd gotten up this morning expecting another normal day at jobs they'd held for years or decades. They had no idea their new owner was about to go to war with their biggest client. Rebecca knocked on my door frame. David, we just got a call from Meridian. They want to meet tomorrow to discuss the transition and ensure continuity of service. How do you want to handle this? I looked out at the production floor, where teams were carefully assembling the structural components that would become part of buildings, bridges, and infrastructure across the Midwest. These weren't just products. They were foundations that would support communities for generations. Set up the meeting, I said. But make sure Marcus and Tommy are there too. If Meridian wants to play hardball, they should know they're not dealing with the same company anymore. Rebecca smiled. David, I think my father would have liked you. That evening, I drove home through the industrial landscape of southwest Chicago, past factories and warehouses that had built America's heartland. Sarah was waiting with dinner and questions about my first day as a company owner. How does it feel? She asked as we sat down to eat with the twins. Terrifying, I admitted. Like jumping out of a plane and hoping the parachute opens. Emma, always the practical one, looked up from her spaghetti. Dad, why would you jump out of a plane? Sometimes, sweetheart, the plane is going to crash anyway. Jumping gives you a chance to land somewhere better. She considered this seriously, then nodded. That makes sense. Can we have ice cream? Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Sarah and I sat on our back porch despite the November cold, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about the future. Are you ready for tomorrow's meeting? She asked. I thought about Jennifer Walsh's threats, Michael Chen's cowardice, and all the compromises I'd watched good people make in the name of corporate loyalty. Sarah, for 8 years I played by their rules. Climbed their ladder, accepted their priorities, kept quiet when they asked me to compromise. Tomorrow, for the first time in my professional life, I get to play by mine. And what are your rules? Quality matters. Integrity matters. People matter more than profit margins. She leaned against my shoulder, and we watched the lights of Chicago twinkle in the distance. Somewhere out there, in glass towers and corporate boardrooms, people were making decisions that would affect thousands of workers, hundreds of communities, and the fundamental question of what American business was supposed to stand for. Tomorrow I would find out if there was still room in that system for companies that chose to do things right. The conference room at Meridian Industries felt different when I walked into it as an adversary rather than an employee. The same mahogany table, the same fluorescent lighting, the same view of downtown Chicago, but now I sat on the opposite side of everything I'd built there. Jennifer Walsh entered exactly on time, flanked by Michael Chen and 2 people I didn't recognize. A sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit who screamed corporate attorney, and a younger man with the aggressive confidence of someone who'd been hired to clean up other people's problems. David, Jennifer said with a smile that could have frozen Lake Michigan. Congratulations on your acquisition. Though I have to say we're surprised by this career change. Jennifer. Michael. I nodded to each of them, then gestured to my companions. I believe you know Rebecca Hartwell, President and CEO of Hartwell Manufacturing. This is Tommy Morrison from Morrison Capital Partners, and Marcus Hartwell, our head of operations. The introductions were crisp and professional, but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone knew this wasn't a routine client meeting. Jennifer's attorney, she introduced herself as Sandra Mills from Klein, Davidson and Associates, took control of the conversation. Mr. Chin, we understand you've acquired controlling interest in one of our key suppliers. We wanted to discuss how this transition might affect our existing contracts and future business relationships. Our contracts are clear and binding, Rebecca responded before I could speak. Hartwell Manufacturing will continue to fulfill all existing obligations according to the specifications and timelines we've already agreed to. Of course, Sandra said smoothly. However, given the circumstances of Mr. Chen's departure from Meridian, we want to ensure there are no conflicts of interest that might affect service quality or reliability. There it was. The threat wrapped in legal language and corporate politeness. They were questioning whether I could be trusted to honor contracts with my former employer. Tommy leaned forward, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him successful in private equity. Ms. Mills, are you suggesting that Morrison Capital Partners and Hartwell Manufacturing are somehow incapable of maintaining professional standards? Because if that's your position, we should probably discuss it with your company's other suppliers and clients. The younger man, I'd learned his name was Craig Hoffman, Meridian's new director of supplier relations, jumped in with the aggressive approach Jennifer had probably coached him to use. Look, let's cut through the corporate speak, he said, his voice carrying the kind of confidence that comes from never having been truly challenged. We all know why Chen bought into Hartwell. This is about revenge, not business. We're prepared to offer very generous contract modifications to ensure continuity, but we need guarantees that personal grievances won't affect professional obligations. The room went quiet. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see construction cranes working on new developments along the Chicago River. The city was constantly rebuilding itself, tearing down old structures to make room for something newer, shinier, supposedly better. Craig, I said finally, you're right about one thing. This is personal. But not in the way you think. I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street where I'd stood just weeks ago as a terminated employee. 8 years ago, I joined Meridian because I believed in what this company claimed to represent. Quality work, ethical business practices, building things that last. For 8 years, I helped build relationships with suppliers like Hartwell based on mutual respect and shared standards. I turned back to face the room. Then you asked me to compromise those standards. When I refused, you fired me. You thought that was the end of the story. Jennifer's face was flushed with anger, but she kept her voice level. David, you were terminated for refusing to implement cost-saving measures that our analysis showed were perfectly safe and industry standard. Your analysis was wrong. Marcus pulled out a tablet and placed it on the table. We had our engineers review the specifications Meridian proposed. The material substitutions would have reduced structural integrity by approximately 15%. Within acceptable tolerances for some applications, but not for the government infrastructure project you're bidding on. Sandra Mills looked uncomfortable. Those specifications were developed by Meridian's engineering team in consultation with industry experts. Industry experts who prioritized cost savings over safety margins, Rebecca added quietly. My father built this company by never compromising on structural integrity. We won't start now. The room fell silent again. Craig Hoffman was taking notes on his phone, probably calculating how quickly Meridian could find alternative suppliers. Jennifer was staring at me with the kind of focused hostility I'd seen her use to destroy other employees who'd crossed company policy. Michael Chen, who hadn't spoken since the introductions, finally cleared his throat. David, what do you want from us? It was a good question and one I'd been thinking about for weeks. What did I want? Revenge? Vindication? An apology that would never come? I want Meridian to honor the contracts you've already signed with Hartwell, using the original specifications we all agreed to. I want fair payment terms and reasonable timelines. And I want future contracts to be negotiated honestly, based on real costs and actual requirements rather than artificial pressure tactics. And if we don't agree to those terms? Sandra Mills asked. Tommy smiled. Then you'll need to find another supplier for 60% of your structural components. In a market where quality manufacturers are increasingly rare and increasingly expensive. The implications hung in the air like smoke from a fire everyone could smell but nobody wanted to acknowledge. Meridian had built their business model around pressuring suppliers into unsustainable concessions. If Hartwell stood firm, other suppliers might follow their example. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, studying me with the calculating expression I'd seen her use during contract negotiations with external vendors. David, let's be realistic. Hartwell needs Meridian more than we need Hartwell. You've invested heavily in a company that depends on our business for survival. Are you really willing to destroy that investment to make a point? Jennifer, I said, standing to leave, I'm willing to build something better than what I left behind. The question is whether Meridian is interested in being part of that conversation or if you'd prefer to keep playing the same games that drove me away in the first place. Rebecca gathered her materials and stood as well. We'll fulfill our existing contracts according to the original specifications and timelines. Any future business will need to be negotiated in good faith, with fair terms for both parties. As we walked toward the door, Michael finally found his voice again. David, wait. I turned back to face my former friend and boss. The Hartwell project, he said quietly. The safety concerns you raised. Were they legitimate? The room was completely silent. Sandra Mills looked ready to tackle Michael to prevent him from saying anything that might create legal liability. Jennifer's face was a mask of corporate fury. Michael, you know they were. You've seen the same engineering reports I have. He nodded slowly, looking older than I remembered. I'm sorry. It wasn't much, but it was something. An acknowledgement that the man I'd once respected was still there somewhere, buried under layers of corporate pressure and professional compromise. Take care of yourself, Michael. The elevator ride down 30 floors felt like rising instead of falling this time. When we stepped out into the lobby, Tommy was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. That went better than I expected, he said as we walked toward the revolving doors. How so? They're scared. Really scared. If they weren't, Jennifer would have terminated the contracts immediately and dared us to find other clients. Instead, they're negotiating. Rebecca looked thoughtful. David, what happens now? Do we go back to business as usual, or are we at war? I pushed through the revolving door onto LaSalle Street, where Chicago's afternoon energy surrounded us with the sounds of construction, traffic, and ambition. The November air was sharp and clean, carrying the promise of winter and the possibility of new beginnings. Rebecca, we do what we've always done. We build things that last, we treat people fairly, and we compete on quality rather than price. If that puts us at war with companies like Meridian, so be it. Over the following weeks, the business community watched our confrontation like a boxing match between different philosophies of American capitalism. Meridian tried to pressure other suppliers to refuse contracts with us, while we quietly reached out to contractors and government agencies who valued reliability over cost savings. The breakthrough came on a cold December morning when Rebecca called with news that changed everything. David, you need to get to the office immediately. We just got a call from the Department of Transportation. They want to discuss the infrastructure modernization project. The DOT contract was worth more than $80 million over 3 years, representing the kind of stable, long-term relationship that could transform Hartwell from a regional supplier into a national player. More importantly, it was the same contract Meridian had been bidding on with their cost-cutting specifications. That afternoon, I sat in our conference room with Rebecca, Marcus, and a team of federal engineers who'd come to inspect our facilities and review our capabilities. The lead engineer, a woman named Dr. Patricia Chin, no relation to Michael, had spent 30 years working on infrastructure projects from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Big Dig. Mr. Chin, she said, reviewing our quality control documentation, your reputation in the industry is impressive. Multiple contractors have recommended Hartwell as a supplier that prioritizes structural integrity over profit margins. That's exactly what we need for this project. The contracts were signed 2 weeks before Christmas, ensuring Hartwell's financial stability for the next 3 years while positioning us to compete for similar projects nationwide. Meridian's bid was rejected due to concerns about their proposed material specifications. On Christmas Eve, I sat in my home office reviewing financial projections and strategic plans for the coming year. Through our window, I could see neighbors' houses decorated with lights, each one representing families celebrating their own versions of success and happiness. Sarah found me there around midnight, long after we'd put the twins to bed and finished wrapping presents. How does it feel? She asked, settling into the chair beside my desk. Different than I expected. When I started this, I thought it was about proving Meridian wrong, showing them they couldn't push people around without consequences. And now, I thought about the workers at Hartwell, people like Roberto Martinez, who'd worked the production line for 23 years and could spot a structural flaw from 50 feet away. People like Lisa Thompson, the quality control supervisor who'd turned down 3 job offers from competitors because she believed in what Hartwell represented. Now it's about building something that lasts. Something the kids can be proud of. Sarah smiled and took my hand. Your father would be proud too. I thought about my dad, who'd worked construction for 40 years, building bridges and office towers with his hands and his back. He'd always told me that the mark of good work was whether it would still be standing 50 years later. Sarah, what if we could change how business works? Not just at Hartwell but across the industry. What if we could prove that treating people fairly and maintaining quality standards actually makes more money in the long run? Then you'd better be prepared to work harder than you ever have before. The phone rang, interrupting our quiet moment. I almost didn't answer, but the caller ID showed Rebecca's name. David, I'm sorry to call so late, but you need to see the news. Channel 7 just ran a story about Meridian. I turned on the television and found the late-night business report. The anchor was discussing a federal investigation into safety violations on the Meridian-managed Hartwell project, the same project that had cost me my job. Sources close to the Department of Labor confirmed that whistleblower complaints have triggered a comprehensive safety audit of materials and construction practices on the Chicago Infrastructure Modernization Project. The investigation was reportedly initiated by detailed documentation provided by industry insiders concerned about potential safety violations. Sarah squeezed my hand as we watched. David, did you? I sent copies of all the safety reports to the DOL 3 weeks ago. I couldn't let them build something that might collapse. The news report continued with footage of Meridian's headquarters and quotes from government officials promising a thorough investigation. Then the anchor mentioned something that made my heart race. In related news, Hartwell Manufacturing, the supplier at the center of the safety concerns, has been awarded a major federal contract for infrastructure development, reportedly based on their commitment to maintaining the highest safety and quality standards in the industry. I looked at Sarah, seeing my own amazement reflected in her eyes. We actually did it. Did what? We built something better. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The story had exploded across social media and business news outlets. #SafetyFirst was trending on Twitter. Construction workers were sharing stories about pressure to cut corners. Investors were asking questions about corporate responsibility. Tommy called while I was making coffee. David, my phone hasn't stopped ringing. Every private equity firm in Chicago wants to know how we identified Hartwell as an investment opportunity. Every manufacturer wants to discuss partnership possibilities. And 3 different documentary filmmakers want to tell your story. Tommy, slow down. What does this mean for Hartwell? It means we're not just a regional supplier anymore. We're becoming a symbol of something bigger. The question is, are you ready for that responsibility? I looked out at our backyard, where Emma and Jake were building a snowman with the kind of focused determination they'd inherited from both sides of their family. They didn't know their father had become part of a story that was reshaping conversations about corporate responsibility and worker safety. Tommy, schedule meetings with anyone who wants to discuss partnerships based on quality and safety standards. But make it clear, we're not interested in compromising our principles for growth opportunities. That afternoon, while the kids played with their Christmas presents, I sat down with Sarah to discuss what the next chapter of our lives might look like. The phone's been ringing all day, I told her. Interview requests, speaking engagements, business opportunities. This thing is bigger than just Hartwell versus Meridian now. Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching Emma carefully assemble a complex Lego architecture set while Jake built robots with mechanical precision. David, do you remember what you told me when you first started at Meridian? You said you wanted to build something that would make the world a little bit better. I remember. This is your chance. Not just to run a successful company, but to prove that business can be a force for good. That quality and integrity aren't just nice ideas, they're practical strategies that create real value. And if I fail? If the pressure gets too intense and we end up compromising just like everyone else? She took my hand and squeezed it gently. Then at least you'll fail trying to do something worth doing. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. I wasn't expecting anyone on Christmas afternoon, but when I opened the door, I found Michael Chen standing on my front porch, looking nervous and determined. Michael, this is unexpected. David, I know this is probably the last thing you want to deal with today, but I needed to talk to you. Away from lawyers and corporate policies and all the rest of it. Sarah appeared behind me, curious about our unexpected visitor. Michael, would you like to come in? I'll make coffee. We sat in my living room while the kids played in the next room, 2 middle-aged men trying to navigate the ruins of a friendship that had been destroyed by corporate politics and moral compromise. I resigned from Meridian this morning, Michael said without preamble. Because of the investigation? Because of everything. The safety reports you tried to show me. The pressure to force Hartwell into accepting substandard materials. The way Jennifer handled your termination. He paused, staring at his coffee cup. Because I've become someone I don't recognize. I thought about all the conversations we'd had over the years, the late nights working on proposals, the shared frustrations with corporate bureaucracy, the dreams we'd both had about making a difference in our industry. Michael, what are you going to do now? I don't know. Start over, I guess. Try to find a company where doing the right thing isn't considered a career-limiting move. He looked up at me with something like hope in his eyes. David, is there room at Hartwell for someone who's learned some hard lessons about integrity? I thought about Rebecca's commitment to her father's legacy, Marcus's enthusiasm for modernization without compromise, Tommy's vision of ethical capitalism, and all the workers who trusted us with their livelihoods. Michael, Hartwell isn't just about giving people second chances. It's about building a culture where the right choice and the smart choice are the same thing. If you're serious about that kind of work, we should talk. I'm serious. Then welcome to the team. As the sun set on Christmas Day, I stood in my backyard watching my children play in the snow, thinking about the year that had changed everything. 12 months ago, I'd been a corporate employee focused on climbing someone else's ladder. Today I was part owner of a company that was becoming a symbol of something larger than itself. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. David, the DOT just called. They want to discuss expanding our contract to include the bridge renovation project. Merry Christmas, partner. I smiled and put the phone away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new responsibilities. There would be difficult decisions about growth, competition, and maintaining our principles as we scaled up operations. But tonight, surrounded by my family and the quiet satisfaction of work worth doing, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The deep contentment that comes from building something that will outlast you. Through our kitchen window, I could see the lights of Chicago twinkling in the distance. A city built by generations of people who'd refused to accept that good enough was good enough. Tomorrow we'd continue that tradition, one quality product and one ethical decision at a time. The story that had started with a termination notice and a threat to leave quietly had become something much larger. Proof that in America, sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better. And we were just getting started.